It is a dream deeply rooted in the American dream. I have a dream.
Tomorrow marks the 50th anniversary of the March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom. On August 28, 1963, hundreds of thousands gathered at the National Mall to urge the government not only for legal rights, but for jobs and a living wage for African Americans. But today, it seems that their cries for economic justice have gone largely unmet. And how far have African Americans really come economically since the March on Washington? And will the economic goals of the march ever fully be achieved? Talk to us about where African Americans were back in 1963.
Unfortunately, on those demands, on those economic demands, there's been very little progress. Can you see me right now?
Oh, I can see you. You're loud, clear, and perfectly lucid.
I'm sorry, I'm new to this technology. So one of the things that, as you mentioned, jobs was in the title. And in 1963, blacks were twice as likely to be unemployed as whites. And today, blacks are about twice as likely to be unemployed as whites. So on that measure, we've made no progress. Surprisingly, the real value of the minimum wage is less today than it was in 1963. There is a demand to raise the minimum wage so that it would be, in today's dollars terms, over $13 an hour. But unfortunately, we've slipped. Our minimum wage workers are better educated today. They're more productive. And we're a much richer country, yet they're earning less than they did in 1963. So that's really shameful for the country.
What's the link between racial and economic injustice, and how much of what we see can be explained by discrimination?
Well, I think one of the issues is that the March on Washington and many of the political goals that flowed out of it actually did focus on what I would describe as individual discrimination with respect towards racial discrimination and racial inequity and inequality. The problem is that racial discrimination is a problem to the extent that it actually is systematized. And the way that it shows up in our system is through economic inequality. And that's why, even though we've made tremendous progress on black poverty, which is way down, black graduations are way up, as Dante was talking about, there is still twice as much unemployment as there between whites and blacks. That gap actually started in the 1960s, ironically, and has never closed. It's actually widened. That's why black wealth, the wealth gap between whites and blacks is the largest ever on record, now 20 times larger for African Americans and 14 times larger for Latinos. And that's why black home ownership now in 2013 is the lowest it is on record. And that's because we don't have a plan to actually address economic inequality and economic injustice versus the signs of racial discrimination. And those are incredibly important. Both of these two things work together to form white supremacy, which is what translates into this massive gap between whites and blacks. But at the same time, we need to recognize that while tremendous progress has been made rightly on one part of the agenda, another part of the agenda remains largely unfinished and in many ways unaddressed.